If your CEO stood right in front of you, wearing a regular uniform, no title, no name tag, would you recognize them? And if you quietly worked beside that person every day, would your heart be big enough for them to see you? This isn't a dramatic question, it's a warning. Because in this story, one kind-hearted employee changed the entire system, and a CEO could only bow his head and listen. A system doesn't fail because the CEO isn't smart enough. It fails when people like Howard are treated as invisible. Miles Denning was not the kind of CEO who liked wearing a name badge on his chest. He disliked the glitter of titles and even more so, the hollow applause at year-end meetings. Since the very first day he founded Hearthmart, he lived by one simple rule. If a customer remembers you for how you made them feel, then you've succeeded. But over time, even he failed to notice when he had slipped away from that rule. That Monday began like any other. Miles entered the Chicago headquarters with steady steps, neatly dressed, his right hand holding a cup of plain black coffee from the usual shop across the street. The elevator to the 17th floor reflected his face, angular, stern, but not cold. He was still the same, or at least he believed he was still that man who once wiped the windows of the very first Hearthmart store in St. Paul before he could even afford a janitor. In truth, Miles no longer needed to touch any of the small tasks. Hearthmart now had over 300 branches across the United States, more than 12,000 employees, and a centralized management system with real-time dashboards, metrics, and hourly KPI updates. Everything ran smoothly, so smoothly that it had become numb. At exactly 8:07 a.m., Miles sat down and opened his laptop. His inbox, as always, was flooded with more than 400 emails, the previous week's financial summary, a proposal to open a new branch in Phoenix, anonymous complaint reports from the internal tracking system. He skimmed through them with familiar ease, mouse gliding, eyes flicking across subject lines. Everything looked the same. Only the senders' names changed. But then, at line 97, there was a subject line that made him pause. Not because it was flagged, not because it was from someone familiar, but precisely because it was so ordinary. The subject line simply read, "Yesterday. No more. No exclamation marks. No bullet points." Miles opened it. The message contained just one sentence. "I used to love your store, but yesterday I was treated like I was in the way. Sender, Evelyn Quinn, 77 years old, a customer since 2012. No further explanation, no details, no threat of writing a Yelp review or calling a lawyer. Just one line. But it sliced through the confidence Miles held, believing his system was stable. He rested his chin on his hand, fingers still on the keyboard, unmoving. In that moment, the entire room was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. That sentence echoed in his mind like the slow tick of a clock wound too tight. I was treated like I was in the way. Miles remembered Evelyn, not because he personally knew her, but because she was one of the first customers at the old Hearthmart in Naperville, the store where he himself once wrapped gift paper and hand-labeled every price tag. Evelyn was the lady who always came in to buy tablecloths on the third Wednesday of each month. He remembered once kneeling down to tie her shoes because of her back pain, and now, over a decade later, Evelyn still remembered Hearthmart, but not with warmth, rather with a sentence shorter than a sigh. Miles pulled up the internal monitoring system. He typed, "Store number 47, Quincy, Illinois." The report appeared, "Performance stable. Complaint rate low. Staff turnover rate 3.2%, below the system average. Customer rating average, 4.3 out of 5. Everything looked good, even better than expected. But that's what made him uneasy. If all the numbers looked perfect, then why would someone like Evelyn, who once loved the store, feel like she was a burden? He didn't call his assistant, didn't notify HR. Miles stood up, removed his blazer, and put on a worn gray canvas jacket, the same one he used during store visits back in 2017. He pulled from a drawer a beige Hearthmart cap, the old version no longer for sale, put on faded white sneakers, closed the laptop, left behind the meeting schedule, the financial reports, and a pending call with European partners. As he passed through the glass doors of headquarters, a hallway staff member politely nodded. "Good morning, Mr. Denning." Miles gave a slight nod but said nothing. Inside, he wasn't sure whether he was still a CEO or just a man who needed to find out if he was still worthy of what he had built. The black SUV rolled out of the parking lot, heading south toward Quincy. The early spring wind brushed against the windows, and thin wisps of clouds floated low, as if passing through his thoughts. Miles sat in the back seat, looking out the window, but his mind was drifting to a small store 13 years ago, where he once stood under flickering fluorescent lights and wrote Hearthmart's first motto on a board by hand: warm prices, warmer people. But now, did those words still mean anything? A few hours later, the car stopped in front of store number 47, a suburban branch with standard design, bright signage, and a neatly kept lot. Yet amidst all that order, Miles felt something didn't belong, like a house cleaned too thoroughly, so spotless that it no longer felt lived in. He told the driver to pull around back, into the employee parking lot, intentionally walked in from the side, where there were no cameras or security, so he could blend in naturally. In his hand was a small fabric bag, with a few household items he had purchased at another branch, just to create the feel of a real shopper. A breeze carried the scent of new plastic from the automatic doors. His eyes scanned each shelf, each sign, each staff member's face. No one recognized him. But the sad part was, no one even noticed him. At the customer service counter, 3 people were waiting: an elderly woman holding a paper bag, a young father cradling a sleeping child, a middle-aged man constantly checking his watch. No one was behind the counter. Miles looked around. No apologies, no announcements, just silence, long and weary. After nearly 5 minutes, a young man wearing a cap and one earbud emerged from a side door. He looked at no one, said nothing, had no awareness that 3 people had been waiting for him like they were waiting for a little piece of fairness in an indifferent world. Miles didn't say anything. He just stood quietly at the end of the line, watching. But deep within, an old feeling returned. The feeling of having once built something with heart and now seeing it grow cold, like a room where no one lit the fire anymore. Near the back, by the cookware aisle, a middle-aged man in a faded uniform was bending down to restack some fallen items. No one noticed. No one told him to. He just did it, like an old habit, like a way to keep the place from turning completely lifeless. Miles squinted. In that moment, he no longer saw the Hearthmart logo. What he saw was distance, not between people, but between what is right and what is real. And he knew, this place, this moment, that man, this would be where he began again, not with titles, not with authority, but with a silence that deserved to be heard. Hearthmart used to feel like home. Now, no one even looks up. Miles walked through the sliding glass doors of store number 47 like any regular customer. The automatic recognition sensor let out a soft beep as he entered, but not a single pair of eyes lifted. The store was brightly lit, the floors spotless, shelves fully stocked, and crisp white LED lights stretched along the ceiling like mechanical rulers. Everything was in place, but nothing felt alive. He had once believed Hearthmart was the warmest retail chain in America, where employees would know the names of a few elderly customers, where kids were met with smiles, and the elderly didn't have to reach for boxes stacked too high. But today, stepping in as a stranger no one knew, he saw only the absence of human warmth. And that was a feeling clearer than anything the financial reports had ever described. A silver-haired old woman, barely reaching his shoulder, was trying to pull down a large detergent bag from the third shelf. No one came to help. 2 young employees stood less than 10 steps away. One was labeling barcodes, the other was watching something on their phone. Miles stood still, thinking about stepping in, but the woman had already reached for the bag. It slipped from her grip, fell to the floor, and hit her leg, causing her to stumble back, almost falling. A small sound escaped, not of pain but of embarrassment. She bent down to pick it up, but the round, heavy bag made her hands tremble. Still, no one moved. Miles walked over, gently lifted the bag, and placed it into her cart. She looked up, one side of her glasses crooked, her eyes filled with both confusion and gratitude. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, then turned away, quietly pushing her cart forward. Miles watched her walk off, feeling like he had just fixed something small, but painful all the same. because it should not have been him. It should have been the employees who did that first. To the right was the customer service area, beneath a large sign that read, "We're here to help." Three capitalized words printed on a bright yellow background. But beneath that sign, the scene was entirely the opposite. Three people stood in line. A young father holding a sleeping daughter slumped over his shoulder, his forehead glistening with sweat. A middle-aged man in a carpenter's shirt checking his phone repeatedly, clearly anxious about being late to work, and a young woman hugging a rice cooker inside a torn cardboard box. No one was at the counter, no signs, no apologies. Miles quietly joined the line, pretending to study the product in his hand. After nearly 4 minutes, a young man wearing a dark baseball cap and a single white earbud appeared from the side door. His eyes didn't glance at any of the waiting customers. One hand still held his phone, the other scratched his head, his posture slouched like he was half asleep. He dropped into the seat behind the counter, slumped back as if resisting gravity, then said without looking at anyone, "Next." The young father stepped forward and placed the item on the counter. "I'd like to exchange this. The temperature control knob is faulty." The young man, his name printed on the badge, Chad, glanced briefly, then flicked a finger at the box. "Where's the barcode?" The customer frowned. "I'm not sure. It tore off the edge when I opened it." Chad shrugged, didn't look up, and replied flatly, "No barcode, no return." Read the policy. The customer kept calm. "I have the receipt." Chad didn't react. He just muttered, "Lady, read the return policy next time." Wrong pronoun, wrong tone, wrong person. But the words hit the air like a slap across an already exhausted room. The rest of the line grew uneasy. The man behind cleared his throat. The woman holding the rice cooker clutched the box tighter, and the little girl stirred on her father's shoulder. Miles remained silent, watching, but he was no longer just a bystander. His chest tightened. He was the one who had written the original customer service manual for Hearthmart, with the very first line stating, "No one should have to wait to be respected." And now the sentence Chad had just thrown out had crushed that philosophy in less than 3 seconds. The father silently took his product and walked away. The young woman stepped forward, speaking softly. "I just wanted to ask about changing the color. I bought it just yesterday." Chad still didn't look up. "Only if the color's in stock. Check it yourself." She didn't even get the chance to respond before Chad tilted his chin toward the right-hand aisle. No directions, no eye contact, not another word. She walked off. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't want to make a scene. Everyone was trying to maintain a civility that the system itself had already lost. Now it was Miles's turn. He raised the item in his hand, a basic kitchen knife, and held it forward. "Excuse me, I just wanted to ask about the price of this." Chad didn't look, didn't blink. Still chewing gum, his fingers scrolling his phone, he said as if on autopilot, "Scan it yourself. Kiosk's in the left corner." One sentence, then silence, as if Miles didn't exist. Miles said nothing, didn't react, didn't ask again. He simply stood there for a brief moment, holding the item, his eyes fixed on the slogan behind the counter. Hearthmart, warm prices. Warmer people. The letters were bold, printed clearly, still intact. But what had faded was the spirit behind them. He turned away, heading toward the scanner kiosk. Along the way, he looked more closely. A shelf tipped awkwardly, no one straightened it. A promotional poster was stuck on crookedly, its edges peeling and torn. A shopping cart abandoned mid-aisle. No one bothered to move it. An elderly man pushed a rattling metal basket with a warped wheel, and no one helped. And the staff? Two of them sat near the mini cafe counter, giggling over a video on someone's phone. Neither wore a name tag. Everything was present: products, prices, lights, background music, self-checkout systems. But the one thing most essential, human trust, was completely absent. And that made the space feel no different from a cold production line. Miles knew he couldn't see everything in a day, but he also knew that just 30 minutes was enough to confirm. Something here had gone off track, not because of one person, but because of an entire culture. And it hadn't started with the young employees, but with those who allowed this to happen without speaking up. Just as he passed the kitchenware section, a cast iron pot slipped from the shelf, misplaced, and fell to the ground with a loud clank. None of the staff nearby moved. Only one man, an older gentleman in a worn Hearthmart uniform, waiting in line, immediately bent down to pick it up. He placed it back carefully, adjusted the surrounding pots to line them up neatly, then walked away without saying a word. Miles tilted his head, watching him. No one praised him. No one noticed. But Miles did. And deep inside, a small spark flickered, amid a place that seemed to have turned all its lights off. Among all the hollow stares, one man quietly restacked every pot. Miles walked slowly through the final aisle of the kitchenware section, feeling as if he were carrying hundreds of meaningless charts on his back. Ahead was the ceramics display, supposedly a cozy corner, part of the brand concept presented to him by the creative team last year. The sign that read "Cook Like Home" hung crooked, one hook having come loose. Below it were shelves of stainless steel pots, non-stick pans, cutlery sets, and several empty hooks where products had yet to be restocked. It was clear that customers had picked through this area, but no staff had tidied up. A large black pot lay on the floor, dust collecting around its base as if it had fallen long ago. No one bothered to pick it up. People walking by stepped over it like it wasn't even there. A young mother pushing a cart passed nearby. Her child, squinting from the seat, pointed and asked, "Mom, why is that pan on the floor?" The mother said nothing and kept walking. The issue wasn't who dropped it. It was that no one fixed it. Miles was about to step forward and return it to the shelf when he noticed someone else had bent down before him. An older man, slightly hunched, knelt to the floor, one hand carefully lifting the pot, the other straightening the surrounding items. He wasn't wearing the new uniform, had no earbuds, no digital name badge. Just a faded navy blue shirt with an old Hearthmart logo, a white dress shirt tucked in neatly underneath, and a crossbody canvas apron stained with old ink near the side. Everything about him spoke of age, not outdated, but of someone who never lowered his own standards just because others had. Miles stood still, silent. He watched the man's every movement, picking up each pot lid, wiping off the dust, arranging the metal layers by size, aligning each handle in the same direction. No one told him to do it. No cameras were rolling. No customers stood by watching. But he did it, as if each pot was a piece of his personal honor. When the man stood and straightened his back, he turned to find Miles nearby. Their eyes met. No surprise, no awkwardness. Just the look between two men who had lived long enough to understand more than they said. The man gave a small smile, a polite nod, then spoke first. "Need a hand with something?" His voice was warm, deep, unhurried, as if each word had passed through time and been carved carefully on the way out. Miles was surprised, not by the words, but by how they weren't procedural. They weren't the forced lines from customer service training manuals. It felt more like how a neighbor might ask if you need help with your groceries while you fumble with your keys. Natural, sincere, without obligation. "I'm just looking for a knife set for my mother," Miles replied, keeping his tone as casual as any customer would. The man nodded, stepped toward the shelf, picked up a small knife set, angled the box slightly and said, "This one's standard. Works fine, but if your mom cooks often, I'd recommend the signature line. Sharper blades, softer grip, easy to clean, holds its edge longer, safer for seniors." Miles hadn't asked, but the man explained anyway. Not pushy, not rehearsed, not trying to sell, just helping. "There's this one too," he continued, lifting another set. "Not much more expensive, but made from Japanese steel. I prefer it for folks with weaker hands. It's lighter." Then he nodded toward the far left corner. "If you want to try the grip, I can grab a demo from the back." Miles gently shook his head. "That's all right. I'm just browsing for now." "Thank you." The man gave a small nod. "Feel free. Name's Howard. If you need anything, just holler." Miles returned the nod. "Thanks, Howard." The two men looked at each other. No formal introductions. No title needed. But for Miles, that was enough. Enough to know this man was the last remaining piece of the Hearthmart he once dreamed of. Howard turned back to adjust the shelf. Each step he took was measured, steady, never rushed. His body showed signs of age. The left shoulder sagged slightly, and from time to time he rubbed his neck. But his eyes and posture held clarity and pride. Miles watched him for a long moment. There was nothing performative in what he did, nothing done out of fear of being judged. It was the result of habit, of character, of believing that even when no one's watching, you still do it right. "Howard," Miles called softly, "how long have you been working here?" The man turned, smiled faintly. "Coming up on 10 years, I think. I joined back when this was just a single-floor store with an open stock area in the back. It's bigger now, but also different." He paused for a second. Miles asked, "Different how?" Howard looked around, his eyes revealing a touch of reflection. "I guess, back then, we knew our customers by name. Now we know their order ID." He wasn't bitter. He simply spoke like a man remembering something and quietly mourning its loss. Miles said slowly, "I saw you pick up that pot earlier." No one seemed to notice. Howard gave a soft laugh. "Didn't expect anyone to. I just did what I always do. Whether the customer sees it or not, whether the other staff pitch in or not, I still believe in keeping things tidy. Not for the company, just because I don't want to lose that discipline in myself." Inside Miles, each word struck like a bell that hadn't rung in years. Howard didn't speak in corporate slogans. He didn't talk about brand missions, customer experience, or service philosophy. He was simply living rightly. And that was exactly what Miles had lost through years of chasing dashboards and quarterly reports. "Have you ever thought about becoming a manager?" Miles asked. Howard chuckled softly. "People have asked. I've even been considered a few times. But I guess I'm not the type they pick. I'm older, not great with the internal apps, not fond of sitting in offices. Sometimes I feel like I don't quite fit the times." He glanced at Miles and smiled. "But as long as I'm still out here, helping customers, straightening shelves, and reminding the younger ones to look up when an elder walks in, I still feel useful." Miles said nothing more. Not because he lacked words, but because he knew if he spoke, his voice would shake. Not out of weakness, but because amid all the numbers, titles, names, offices, and spreadsheets, he had just rediscovered the very first thing they'd forgotten: the original meaning. A man who had stayed for 10 years, but was always overlooked. Miles walked slowly toward the internal storage area, where the employee bulletin board and shift schedules were posted. Along the way, he kept observing small details: a toppled milk shelf that no one bothered to fix, a self-checkout screen flashing, "Out of paper. Please alert staff," for nearly 10 minutes without response, a boy dropping a water bottle while his mother rushed to wipe it up. 3 employees nearby just glanced and moved on. He wasn't angry, just sad, because this was no longer about individual negligence. This was a consequence, and like all consequences, it stemmed from a deeper root: how an organization views people and decides who deserves to be seen and who doesn't. He stopped in front of the bulletin board placed just outside the staff stockroom. Behind the dusty glass panel were layers of pinned sheets, faded shift schedules, safety regulation lists, a notice for next month's team meeting. Nothing personal, no team photos, no thank you notes from customers, not a single piece of individual recognition. Miles scanned the board, hoping to find any sign of acknowledgement for Howard's work, but there was nothing. A young employee emerged from the stockroom, carrying a box labeled "Kitchenware Restock." Miles kept his tone light. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone who helped me in the kitchenware section earlier. I think his name was Howard." The employee glanced quickly, squinting to recall. "Oh, the old guy who always arranges stuff. Where's that fabric apron?" Miles nodded. "Yes, that's him. Seems like he's been here a while." The young man shrugged. "Almost a decade, I think. I've only been here 6 months, but the others say he's been around since the store was tiny. Super nice guy, always helping out. But I don't think he's ever made it to team lead." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" The young man shifted his gaze, voice hesitant. "Not sure. Maybe because he's not used to the new software. And, well, some managers say he lacks energy. Doesn't match the modern leadership style." Then, as if worried he'd said too much, he quickly added, "I mean, no disrespect. I really like him. It's just a bit of a shame." Miles nodded slightly, silent. He continued toward the back room. The door was ajar, no one standing watch, no supervisor nameplate. Under flickering fluorescent lights stood towering shelves packed high, some unlabeled boxes, others leaning dangerously, propped up by folded cardboard. In the far corner was a bent suggestion board, one hook pulled halfway out of the wall. At its base lay a stack of old papers, a few pages scattered on the floor like they had been blown by wind. Miles knelt and picked one up. The paper was creased, its edges yellowing, but the handwriting remained legible. Blue ink, slanted left, carefully written. The message was simple. The customer service counter is understaffed. Many guests complain about long wait times. Suggest adding more staff during Thursday evening peak hours, especially between 3 to 6 p.m. Signed, H. Boone, 4 months ago. No reply, no received stamp, no check mark. No one had taken it down. No one had followed up. The paper lay there like a whisper blown away by the wind and forgotten. Miles stood still, gently gripping the edge of the page. His eyes lingered on the signature. Boone. H. Boone. A man who had submitted a quiet suggestion. Not angry, not demanding, just pointing out something that needed fixing and trusting someone would read it. But no one had. Miles left the stockroom, returned to his car, and opened his personal laptop. He logged into the internal HR system and searched Boone, Howard, Store 47. The profile came up. Start date, April 12th, 2013. Job title, Associate Stock and Floor Support. Resignation history, none. Policy violations, none. Customer complaints, 0. Annual performance reviews, meets expectations, stable, not exceptional. Internal notes, 3 recommendations for promotion to customer support team lead by different supervisors in 2017, 2019, and early 2022. All 3 marked postponed, not a staffing priority, not unqualified, not rejected, just not a priority right now. In the final note, one line caught Miles's eye. He read it 3 times over. Howard is well liked by guests and trusted by peers. However, his style does not align with the branch's direction of speed, flexibility, digitalization. Miles leaned back in his seat, eyes staring out the car window. Everything seemed to recede. All those years he believed he was building a system where good people would always be recognized. Now undermined by that very system, the same words he had once signed off on, now turning their back on someone like Howard. He closed the laptop and sat silently. His memory drifted to a winter day in Hearthmart's first year, when a young employee named Luis had stopped mid-restocking to help an elderly customer who had fallen. That day, Miles had added Luis to the promotion shortlist, not because of anything listed in a checklist, but because of an act that no system could quantify. He had once said, "We don't need people who move fast. We need people who know when to stop." But he himself, over the years, had allowed those words to be replaced by KPIs, evaluation apps, and time-tracking algorithms. He sighed. Howard wasn't someone who wasn't good enough. He was someone forgotten because he didn't know how to present himself the way the system demanded. And that was the real danger. Because if the system only promoted those who followed process and overlooked those who preserved values, then what Miles had built was no longer a people-first foundation, but a cold machine running selection logic. Miles returned to the store. By now, dusk had settled. The automatic doors still opened. Customers still came and went. Chad was still at the counter, eyes on his screen, one earbud in. Howard was at the far end of the canned goods aisle, helping an elderly customer adjust a squeaky shopping cart wheel. No one said a word, but everything was clear. The one who deserved recognition was serving. The one who needed reevaluation remained at the center. Miles stood in the aisle, still holding Howard's suggestion slip in his hand. He knew this wasn't the fault of Howard or Chad or even the store manager. It was the fault of a broken chain of logic where tasks were measured with spreadsheets. But people were no longer measured at all. The reports were spotless, but the heart had withered long ago. That afternoon, Miles left the store earlier than planned. He said goodbye to no one, didn't stop to greet Howard, didn't leave his name. He simply walked out through the glass doors, crossed the parking lot, and stepped into the waiting black SUV. The door shut with a soft thud, sealing him off from all the noise behind. Everything out there, the aisles, the customers, the checkout system, the giggles of staff, was now completely cut off. But inside Miles's head, it all echoed relentlessly. The image of Howard adjusting the wheel of a cart for an elderly woman. The image of Chad scrolling through his phone without glancing at a single guest. The image of that old suggestion note, left lying beneath the bulletin board like a forgotten piece of mail. Miles instructed the driver to take him back to the corporate office that same evening. He didn't go home, didn't stop by his usual gym, didn't have dinner at his familiar executive club. When he entered the 17th floor office of Hearthmart's Chicago headquarters, the lights had already been turned off. Only the faint glow from the digital product board lit the hallway, displaying this month's featured items. He unlocked the office himself, turned on the lights, and stepped into the familiar space. The one he once believed was the command center for human-centered decision-making. But now it was nothing more than a polished shell. He sat at his desk, opened his personal laptop, and logged into the internal executive system with top-level access. The dashboard loaded, system-wide performance metrics, quarterly revenue analytics, customer satisfaction breakdowns by region, and employee productivity data. Everything appeared stable. The green growth bar for the current week extended past the target. Customer complaint rates sat at minimum acceptable. Payroll was optimized. From a strategic standpoint, Hearthmart was a successful business. But Miles no longer cared about the strategic view. He didn't want to see the business as an organization. He wanted to see it as a human community. He typed into the internal search bar, Store 47, Quincy, Illinois, Personnel Performance. The staff directory loaded. He scrolled down to the section labeled Customer Complaints, Front Desk. Instantly, 8 summary entries appeared. The most frequently named individual, Chad M6 of the 8 complaints, came from Thursday and Saturday peak hours. All shared the same phrases: cold attitude, not helpful, unprofessional, ignored my question, dismissive. One customer had even specified, I asked about a return and he told me to read the sign and move on. I've never felt so embarrassed. Miles clicked through each entry. No internal reply, no shift adjustment, no resolution notes. Every single one marked, acknowledged, no further action. He moved on to Chad's performance reviews. The aggregate rating displayed 3.6 out of 5, above average. Supervisor notes read, Chad is punctual, reliable in shift coverage, completes task list. Not a single mention of customer interaction. Not a single line about team rapport. No score categories for soft skills, empathy, conflict handling, positive impact. Miles sat silently. The above-average numbers were keeping Chad in place, despite 8 negative guest reviews in the past 5 months. And the system had flagged Chad as eligible for internal promotion next quarter, citing high work-hour efficiency, no policy violations, disciplined time record. Miles muttered aloud as if speaking to himself. Efficiency? Or just the side effect of indifference? He hit back and switched tabs to Howard Boone's file. The profile was simple, no profile photo. Under appreciation notes were 21 entries from co-workers and customers over the span of 10 years. Many were specific. Howard helped me carry items to my car. Howard always greets me by name. Howard knows I'm diabetic and always reminds me to check ingredients. Yet all of them were filed under appreciation, not management relevant. Miles clicked into the promotion requests. 3 recommendation entries from 3 different years appeared. All declined with the reason, not prioritized or not digitally proficient. Worse still, under the Development Path tab, the Training Assigned section was blank. Howard had never been enrolled in any skill advancement course. No leadership training, no management track, no 3-year development plan. Miles almost whispered, he didn't stagnate because he didn't want to grow. He stagnated because no one offered the chance. He pulled up the nationwide workforce analysis page, queried the list of employees tagged as low-tech adoption, high human impact. The search returned just 4 names across the entire system. One of them was Howard Boone, but beside it, a red warning line flashed. Low-tech adoption impacts promotion algorithm. Recommend caution before assignment to leadership role. Miles leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, eyes on the ceiling. An entire system he had built, now using automation to block the very people who still carried heart. He thought back to the speech he had delivered to the full board 5 years ago when Hearthmart opened its 200th store. We won't become an empire. We'll become a community, a place where kind people don't need to shout to be heard. But now those very people, like Howard, were not being heard at all, even though they knocked patiently through quiet actions each day. No shouting, no demands. Just belief that someone would notice. But this system couldn't see that, because this system didn't measure humanity. It only measured data, and data doesn't know how to say thank you. Miles remained there for hours. The computer screen eventually dimmed to battery saver mode. The conference room stayed dark. Chicago's city lights still glowed outside. But inside him, only one thing remained crystal clear. He could no longer let this system run even one more day without being re-examined from the roots. The CEO returned. No disguise. And this time, everything stopped the moment he walked in. That morning in Quincy was slightly overcast, with clouds spread low and thick as if the entire sky had lowered itself to the ground, trying to listen, trying to see how far this place had drifted from its original course. Miles Denning left corporate headquarters at 6 a.m. No disguise, no old coat, no baseball cap. Today he wore a navy blue suit, a charcoal gray tie, polished leather shoes, a simple but expensive watch, and eyes that gleamed clear after a sleepless night. If the day before he was just an anonymous customer, then today he returned as himself, the founder, the chairman, and the man who had placed the words "warm prices, warmer people" on every glass window more than a decade ago. When the black SUV pulled up in front of store number 47 at 8:12 a.m., the storefront looked unchanged. The faux flower rack was still askew. The big spring sale banner hung crooked to one side, and two employees near the front were chatting with half their eyes on their phones. But the moment Miles stepped out of the vehicle, something shifted. One nearby employee caught a glimpse of him, eyes widening, shoulders stiffening, giving a nervous nod. A second worker exiting the aisle nearly dropped a box of tea when she met his gaze. And as he walked through the glass doors, the atmosphere inside slowed down, like a film reel playing at half speed. Chad was behind the counter, one hand on his phone, the other adjusting his earbud. As he looked up and locked eyes with the man walking straight toward him, shoulders squared, unblinking gaze, no name tag, but unmistakable, his face turned pale, as though blood had been drained from his cheeks. His hand slipped, the phone clacked onto the counter. The earbud slid from his ear and dangled from his collar. Chad looked like he wanted to step back but found his feet glued to the floor. Miles said nothing. He walked slowly, deliberately, eyes locked on the counter. No one dared to breathe loudly. The employee at the next register stopped arranging prices. A customer browsing the spice rack turned her head. A young woman passing by halted in the aisle, frozen mid-reach with a box of cereal in hand. No one spoke. No one needed to. Anyone who had worked at Hearthmart long enough had seen his photo, heard his name, and they all knew Miles Denning never showed up at a store unless something was wrong. Howard emerged from the side aisle carrying a box in both arms. When he saw him, he paused, tilted his head, then hurried over. "Good morning, sir," he said, voice as calm as ever, but with a hint of hesitation. "Mr. Denning." Miles gave a faint smile, just enough to reassure him. "Good morning, Howard. I remember your name." Then he turned, looked around the store, and faced the counter again. "I'll need the attention of all staff for about 15 minutes. Right here. Right now." No one asked why, but staff began stepping away from their stations, one by one, confused, worried. Many had never seen him in person, but now they understood. This wasn't a checkup, wasn't a bonus announcement, and certainly not a celebration. This was a declaration. 9 minutes later, the entire store staff, except for two still manning the registers, had gathered inside the small back room behind the manager's station. The room was old, with yellowing walls, a whiteboard still plastered with directives from last year. There was a slight musty smell, and the flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Not enough chairs. A few employees leaned against the walls. Chad sat in the far left corner, head down, eyes avoiding everything. Howard sat in the back, hands folded at his waist, eyes forward but visibly uneasy. Miles stood at the center of the room. No papers, no assistant, no slides. Just him, with the eyes of a man who had returned after years of letting his own system blind him. "I'm not here to inspect you. I'm here to apologize." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. The room fell completely silent. "I didn't build Hearthmart to get rich. I built it because I believe customers deserve to be served with sincerity, and employees deserve to be led with recognition. But a week ago, I stood right here in this store, just a few feet away from many of you, and I wasn't treated like someone who existed." He paused. No one moved. Every eye was on him. Chad couldn't sit still anymore. He shifted in his seat, still not looking up. Miles continued. "I was the man who asked about the kitchen knife, the one dismissed with a chin nod, the one who heard 'scan it yourself.' I didn't say anything then, but I remembered everything." Chad trembled slightly. A few coworkers glanced at him, not with judgment, not with scorn, just stunned. Miles turned and pointed at Howard. "And I was also the man this gentleman, Howard, helped without knowing who I was. I asked and he answered. I didn't buy anything, and he still thanked me." He walked to the back, pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "This is a suggestion note he submitted 4 months ago. It wasn't read. It wasn't processed. It lay on the floor, and I, the founder, picked it up." Howard blinked. For the first time that morning, he turned away slightly. Miles went on. "No one told me that Howard had been recommended for a management role 3 times. No one told me all 3 were denied because he didn't fit the pace of digitalization. But he fits what matters most, the spirit of this place. And for that reason, I am officially appointing Howard Boone as assistant manager of Store 47, effective today." The room didn't erupt in applause, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. They were choked up. Howard lifted his head, eyes red but not crying. He simply nodded, his lips pressed tight. Chad was different. He couldn't lift his head. Sweat rolled down his temple. Miles looked toward him, voice steady. "I'm not firing you. Not because you were right, but because you were wrong, and I used to be you." Chad finally looked up for the first time that morning. His eyes were wet, filled with remorse. "I too was once cold, just trying to finish my shift and collect my check. But someone didn't give up on me. So today I won't give up on you. You'll work directly under Howard, not to make up for anything, but to relearn how to be human." The entire room held its breath. Miles turned slightly, his final gaze sweeping the room. "Today is the first time I've seen Hearthmart as it was meant to be, and I promise, it won't be the last." It wasn't a meeting for blame. It was a gathering to redraw the path forward for an entire system. The room remained silent after Miles finished his final words. What he had just said didn't sound like a corporate executive addressing a team. It sounded more like a father sitting down with his family after years apart, beginning with an apology no one expected, and ending with an action that made everyone look at each other with new eyes. Miles slowly walked toward the whiteboard at the back wall. His hand brushed against the frame, wiping away a layer of dust almost too faint to see. The old printed directives from the previous year still clung to the board. A few yellow sticky notes had curled at the edges, their ink nearly faded. He picked up a marker from the tray and, with the care of someone etching 10 years of memory into every stroke, wrote, "Hearthmart, serving like family." Then he turned around, not explaining the slogan, not repeating some catchphrase from the company website. He just stood there holding the marker, looking each person in the eye. "How many of you have heard this line before? Serve like family?" A few hands went up hesitantly, mostly from longtime employees. Miles gave a small nod. "And does anyone know where it came from?" No one answered. Chad quietly shook his head. Howard said nothing, but his gaze had shifted to a kind of silence that comes when you know something long buried is about to be unearthed. Miles began to speak, his voice steady, neither dramatic nor heavy. "In the first year I opened the store, it was just me and 2 others. One day an elderly woman walked in, hands shaking, holding a bag of cookies, but she'd forgotten her wallet. I looked at her face, And without hesitation, I said, "Take it, ma'am. We'll put it on the store's trust." The next day she came back, not only to pay, but with homemade cookies for us. He gave a faint smile. That day I wrote the first sentence on the board behind the register. Whether they're regulars or strangers, serve them like their family. I wrote it myself, with a marker. No one told me to. I just wanted everyone to remember. He paused for a moment, then looked around the room. But then we grew, from one store to 10, from 10 to 100, and to manage all of it, I and the system started relying on spreadsheets, KPIs, performance reports, automated behavior analytics. All of it made sense, but just because it made sense doesn't mean it was right. No one breathed too loudly. The room felt like it was holding its breath so as not to break something that had just been restored. I stopped writing by hand. I signed policies digitally. I received reports in PDF format. I scored employees through algorithmic recommendations. And because of that, I stopped seeing people like Howard. Not because they were invisible, but because I chose not to look. Howard lowered his head. Not out of shame, but because someone had finally said out loud what he had silently lived through for years. Miles continued. I used to believe that if the system ran smoothly, if every protocol was followed, then the original spirit would carry on naturally. But now I understand that spirit doesn't live in software. It lives in people. He turned back to the board and underlined the words, serving like family. Family isn't where we debate who's right. It's where someone stands up to remind us what is right when everyone else has forgotten. He set the marker down, walked over to Howard, and pulled a small envelope from the inside pocket of his suit. No ceremony, no camera, no memo from a regional director. Just words. Howard, I'm sorry you were overlooked. 3 times denied because you didn't know the new system, but every day you still showed up on time, still bent down to pick up every pot a customer dropped, still smiled at people who didn't smile back. Today, I'm not giving you a title. I'm giving back something you've always deserved. A voice. Howard took the envelope, hands trembling slightly, lips pressed tight. No one could tell if it was tears or light in his eyes, but everyone in the room knew. This was the moment a man who had been muted for years had just been heard again. Miles turned to Chad. No attack, no insult, just a question. Do you think you've treated customers like family? Chad slowly shook his head. His voice broke. I didn't think at all. I just wanted to finish my shift. I didn't know who was standing in front of me. Miles nodded. I used to be you, and someone didn't give up on me. He turned to face the room. We don't change culture with slogans. We change it through how we act when no one's watching, through how we treat people like Howard, the ones who quietly keep this place from rotting. The room began to shift, from tense to attentive, from worried to moved, from distant to connected. Miles placed his hand over his chest. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, but today, I'm here, and I'll be here more often, not to inspect, but to acknowledge. He exhaled gently, ending the talk without needing a conclusion. When he walked out of the room, no one said a word, but every eye followed him, not because he was the CEO, but because he had just done something no one had done in a long time. He gave dignity back to a place that had almost forgotten what it meant. Chad didn't go straight home after the meeting. As everyone filed out of the room, he remained in his seat, as if something hadn't yet dissolved from his chest. No one blamed him. No one called his name. But Miles's question, do you think you've treated customers like family, kept echoing in his head like a slow bell, ringing against the hollow walls of a deep well. It was an old sound, but for the first time, it made him truly listen. On the way home, Chad didn't turn on music like he usually did. His earbuds stayed in his backpack, his phone screen dark. For the first time in months, he let everything be still. No stories, no tweets, no FaceTime call with his girlfriend studying in Wisconsin. Just the everyday sounds he had always tuned out. The swish of tires through puddles, the blare of a school bus horn, the shout of a kid who forgot his homework. That night, he sat alone in the apartment he shared with 2 roommates. On the table, his name tag, Chad, service associate, lay tilted, the desk lamp casting a distorted shadow of it across the surface. He opened his laptop, logged into the Hearthmart internal employee system, and typed into the search bar, Howard Boone. There were no awards, no promotion history, just a few short notes from previous years. Completes tasks on time. No new suggestions submitted. At the bottom were 3 denied promotion recommendations, the last one 2 years ago. Chad closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. I saw him as just a stock guy, when really he was holding up the entire foundation of that place. The words Miles had spoken, "We don't change culture with slogans," touched something Chad had never really had growing up. A mirror worth looking into without feeling ashamed. The next morning, Chad arrived earlier than usual. No one had asked. No one expected it. He stood in the kitchenware section where Howard often organized pots and pans, just waiting. At exactly 7:45, Howard walked in, holding his usual sandwich and coffee bag. He looked up and saw Chad. With a subtle nod, he said, "Early today?" Chad smiled and scratched his head. "I thought, today I'd like to learn how to stock properly." Howard raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you front of house?" Chad shrugged. "Still service. But I think service also means putting things where they belong." There was no lecture, no dramatic mentoring session. Howard simply knelt down, opened a box, and began arranging pots on the shelf. Chad watched him work, not following barcode scanner logic, but according to the height the elderly could reach. He placed aluminum pots within reach of children, cast iron pots at eye level for middle-aged adults, and glass cookware on higher shelves, because few people chose them, and those who did often asked for help. Chad asked, "I thought we just stocked by barcode?" Howard didn't answer immediately. He finished aligning a tilted lid, then finally said, "Barcodes didn't go grocery shopping with my mother. I did." Chad didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He simply nodded. All morning, the two of them worked side by side. Chad learned how to read customers from a distance, learned how to offer help to an elderly lady with the words, "Let me grab that heavy one for you," instead of asking, "Do you need this?" He learned how to glance at a young father's shoes and sense his urgency, shortening his product intro to just one well-placed line. And most importantly, he learned to look at people not through the lens of his own mood that day, but by asking, "Has anyone treated this person kindly yet today?" During their lunch break, Howard handed Chad half a sandwich, as if the two had been working together for years. Chad asked, "You've never quit this job?" Howard finished chewing before replying, "Oh, I've quit." In my head. Many times. But I stayed, because once a lady came in and said, "You're the only one in this store who asked if my feet hurt." She brought me apple pie every week that winter. Chad looked down at his hands, then asked, "Do you think I could ever become someone like you?" Howard didn't answer. He just asked back, "Do you want to be someone people admire, or someone they feel safe standing next to?" Chad didn't know what to say, but he knew he'd never forget that question. That day, Chad didn't just learn how to stock a shelf. He learned to see what the system couldn't. That afternoon, when an elderly woman dropped a jar of jam, Chad didn't call for a cleanup crew. He grabbed a cloth, knelt down, and said, "This is the smoked strawberry jam. You picked a good one. Let me grab a fresh jar for you." The woman smiled, her eyes warm like summer sun breaking through a winter store. And for the first time, Chad understood. Customers don't come for the discounts. They come because someone truly sees them standing there. Change never begins with a trumpet. It starts with a small gesture no one notices. Like the way Chad tied the shoelaces of a lost child while the mother was returning an item. Like how Howard placed an extra stool near the service counter for elderly customers to rest. Like how a new employee named Jamie, never formally trained, took the initiative to reorganize a shelf without being told. No one gave orders. No posters were pinned to the wall. And yet the entire store began to warm. Miles didn't return to Chicago right away. He told the office he needed a week to observe frontline culture. But in truth, he didn't want to leave the feeling he had almost forgotten existed. The feeling that a workplace could be a community. Every morning he sat at the cafe across from store number 47, sipping the same weak espresso, watching the employees walk in one by one. Not to supervise, but to listen for the quiet signs of a fire being rekindled. The same fire he had once lit when founding Hearthmart and had nearly let die. Chad no longer wore headphones during his shift. He kept his phone in his pocket, screen dark. He now knew exactly who would walk through the door at 9:10 every Tuesday. Mr. Robbins buying rubber gloves, who always asked one question, then fell silent for 3 minutes. Mrs. Talbot picking out scented candles, and who constantly returned items but always forgot the receipt. Ms. Garnett shopping for her mother. Chad no longer saw the job as a burden. He saw it as perhaps the only chance in someone's day to be truly seen for who they are. Howard, meanwhile, hadn't changed much, except waking up 15 minutes earlier. But those 15 minutes were where the real change began. He used them to stop by each department and say one simple thing to young staff who had never been asked before. Just ask the customer one thing. Are you doing okay today? Not to earn points, but because he knew, once, that question had saved him from quitting on a very hard day. At lunchtime, instead of eating alone, Chad began inviting others to join him. Jamie, the new hire, said no one had ever asked why she chose to work evening shifts, so Chad asked. A quiet girl named Lacey confessed she had almost quit because Debbie scolded her for wearing the wrong colored sweater. So Howard said, "Don't let someone who doesn't remember your name decide your future." The change wasn't loud, but customers began to feel it. An old man returned just to say, "You folks are different now. I can't say exactly how, but I breathe easier in here." A young mother who hadn't been back since a failed return said, "I came in just to see if anyone would ask me today, 'Do you need any help?'" And someone did. Even the old security guard, who never used to smile, began nodding at the employees. No one told him to. Miles watched it all, never interfering. He knew that if something was happening without titles or commands, that was real change. But he didn't sit idle either. He quietly wrote down the names of every person who sparked a small shift. Chad, Jamie, Lacey, the security guard named Rick, and of course, Howard. On Thursday, he walked into the store, not in disguise, not hidden. For the first time in weeks, he wore his badge. Miles Denning, founder and CEO. But no one panicked. No one rushed to adjust their behavior, because he wasn't there to inspect. He was there to affirm one thing. Hearthmart still had hope. As he passed the kitchenware section, Howard was showing Jamie how to angle the spoons just right. Chad was chatting with a little boy who had just earned a Helper of the Day sticker, and the customers stood in line, quiet but no longer avoiding eye contact. Miles paused, nodded. No speech was needed, no all-hands meeting, because sometimes a flame doesn't need someone to relight it, it just needs the wind to shift in the right direction. Miles Denning didn't like using the word reform. To him, it sounded like something broken that needed a sledgehammer. But Hearthmart wasn't broken. It was just lost. Lost from the spirit he once wrote in the very first employee memo 17 years ago. We don't build a chain, we build a place to come home to. What he saw at store number 47 wasn't a dead system. It was a system that had simply forgotten it once had a heart. Instead of holding a big press conference, launching a new media campaign, or redesigning the logo like most companies in crisis, Miles did something unexpected. He changed the KPI board. Specifically, he revised the internal evaluation form that every employee had to submit monthly. The first line was no longer punctuality, but who did you make feel valued this month? The second wasn't order fulfillment speed, but did you say thank you to a coworker this month? If yes, what for? At first, the HR team thought he was joking. Then they assumed it was a temporary pilot. But when Miles personally sent an email to all senior managers titled, "We can't measure what we don't consider important," everyone understood. The system wasn't changing from the outside in. It was changing from the core. A new program was announced called Route to Floor. No fanfare, no optics, just a simple idea. Each quarter, a member of the leadership team, from the CFO to the head of HR, would go undercover as a full-time employee at a random store. No advance notice, no video crew, number undercover boss hashtag, and most importantly, no one was allowed to report them if discovered. They had to live the experience exactly like the people they managed. When Miles shared this in the first leadership meeting after returning from store number 47, some fell silent, some furrowed brows, some smiled. But no one objected, because they saw his eyes, not the eyes of a man issuing orders, but the eyes of someone who had just remembered why he started. In addition, Miles allowed each store to nominate one employee to receive the Hearth Badge, a pin awarded not by a supervisor, but by peers. The recipient didn't need stellar performance. They only needed to be recognized for a small act of kindness, covering a shift for a colleague, helping a customer to their car in the rain, or simply remembering the security guard's name. At store number 47, the first person to receive the badge was Howard Boone. Chad nominated him, attaching a note. "No one ever taught me how to be a person at work, but he showed me where to start." A month later, in every store, employee meetings began with a single question: who did you help this week? It wasn't mandatory to answer, but oddly enough, most people wanted to share. At a store in Oregon, an employee told the story of helping a customer find an old scarf like the one her late mother used to wear. In Texas, a manager recalled a moment when a lost boy was comforted by a team member drawing him a pencil map. These stories were no longer rumors floating around. They became part of the company's DNA. Hearthmart slowly returned to its former image. Not the image from cozy billboard ads, but the image of a place where people knew each other's names. The change began to soak into every location. Once silent employees started voicing suggestions. Customer feedback wasn't dropped into a suggestion box anymore. It was read aloud every Monday. A staff member in Minnesota shared that her new manager asked, "Is there something you'd like to teach me?" And she cried, because for the first time in 3 years, she felt she mattered. Miles didn't appear much in internal newsletters. He didn't need to, because what he wanted wasn't visibility. It was a system that knew how to care, a system with a soul. Hearthmart no longer measured itself by number of checkouts or speed of transactions. It measured itself with one question. Today, did someone feel seen? The story of store number 47 was never featured in the news. No one made a podcast about it. There was no viral LinkedIn article praising a new kind of leadership. And yet somehow every Hearthmart location heard whispers about the kitchen watcher. No one knew his real name at first, just that he was some older guy with no official title. But everyone seemed to follow him. And then people began asking each other, "Do we have someone like that at our store?" Howard had no idea he was becoming a symbol. He still woke up at 5:30 a.m., walked through the park after finishing his black tea, and checked the soles of his worn shoes. Still wiped down the counters before opening. Still rearranged stray shelves that no one asked him to touch. But the difference now, when he bent down, there was another hand bending down beside him. Lacey, the girl who was once scolded by Debbie for wearing the wrong colored sweater, now walked with Howard through the stockroom every Friday afternoon. She didn't talk much, but whenever he looked down aisle 3, there she was, lifting each cardboard box like she was slowly restoring order to a world she once thought wasn't made for her. Jamie, the young new hire, now regularly asked to swap shifts just to work alongside Howard. She told Miles, who had stopped by the store unexpectedly, that working with him makes this job feel less like a race and more like a place where I get to become a better person, little by little. And Chad, the same employee once labeled rude and unfeeling, pinned a handwritten note on the break room board. It read in messy but heartfelt writing, "You never yelled, never threatened, just showed up when I needed someone most. If anyone asks why I haven't quit, this is the man." No one took the note down. No one found it annoying. In fact, the new manager, after Debbie was reassigned, photocopied it and sent it to headquarters as proof of a healing culture. From that moment, something unusual happened. Other stores began sending emails asking, "In your store, who's quietly holding the flame like Howard?" What seemed like a simple question sparked a company-wide search like no other. No one was asking, "Who has the best sales numbers?" anymore. They were asking, "Who makes others want to come back to work tomorrow?" In Idaho, a Navajo employee named Helen, who had never drawn much attention working the night shift, was nominated by her entire team for always leaving handwritten notes for the next shift. "I saw you did better than yesterday." In Missouri, an elderly man named James, near retirement, had his name written on the whiteboard. For 22 years of never missing a shift, Even on his birthday night, they didn't make the magazine covers. They didn't get immediate raises, but they began to be seen. Not through loud speeches, not with PowerPoint decks, not with banners in the break room. They were seen because they were the foundation. When Miles heard these stories, he didn't organize an award ceremony. He simply sent a quiet email to all employees with the subject line, "Heroes don't have job titles." In the message, he didn't mention store number 47. He didn't mention Howard. There was only a short paragraph. If you've ever thought you were the only one holding the door, cleaning the floors, restocking the shelves, and no one noticed, I want you to know, we are rebuilding the system so that no one like you gets forgotten again. Howard didn't read the whole email because he didn't use a smartphone, but Chad printed it out and taped it to the break room door. Howard simply looked at it, smiled, then turned back to arranging the cookware sets, one by one, with the care of someone preserving a memory that mattered. The entire system didn't need a campaign. They just needed one person like Howard. 3 months after going undercover at Hearthmart, Miles Denning decided to return to store number 47. No assistant came with him, no scheduler, no data reports, no internal meeting agenda. Just one man in a worn denim shirt and an old baseball cap, stepping out of a rental car parked at the far end of the lot. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the familiar Hearthmart sign. Only this time, his gaze no longer carried doubt. It carried something closer to gratitude. From that distance, he couldn't hear the voices, but the small behaviors he witnessed were already a language of their own. An elderly woman was struggling with grocery bags at her cart. Chad, the young man once known for indifference, stepped through the automatic doors, not rushing, not performing. He smiled gently, bent down to open her trunk, and began placing the bags inside one by one. No one was watching. No photos were taken. No manager had issued a directive. It was simply a moment that happened when no one was keeping score. "I hope you still got time today to do something fun," Chad said softly as he closed the trunk and adjusted the strap on her bag. Miles remained still. A light breeze passed through. He didn't need to step inside to sense that a new climate had quietly taken root. An ecosystem that didn't need to be documented, just carried forward in how people treated each other every day. The doors opened again. Howard Boone stepped out. Same worn shirt, same frayed shoes, same steady gait as though each step bore consideration. In his hand was the customer feedback board. Beside the old wooden frame was a new paper sign, bordered in blue, printed in bold font. "All comments will be responded to within 24 hours, no exceptions." A young customer who had just dropped a feedback slip turned back upon seeing Howard. The older man paused, not speaking right away. He placed his hand on the side of the board and asked in a low, steady voice, "Is there anything I can help you with right now? Not just what's on that slip, but what's weighing on you today." Miles felt something tighten in his chest. Not some fleeting emotion, but the profound recognition of seeing his vision, once confined to quarterly strategy decks, now made real through the hands of someone no one had promoted, no one had ever celebrated with a metric. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Through the glass glinting in the late afternoon sun, he saw Lacey showing Jamie how to organize dish sets by color. The two were laughing, a sound that had long been absent from this location. There was no tension, no oversight. They were doing it simply to make things a little more beautiful, a little more kind. Chad's handwritten letter was still pinned on the break room wall, the same uneven emotional words still visible. "You never yelled, never threatened, just showed up when I needed it most." No one had removed it. No one had reminded anyone to keep it up. But it remained, like a quiet emblem, unpatented but undeniable, that the new culture wasn't printed in manuals. It lived in people's hearts. Miles turned and walked back to his car, but he didn't leave right away. He stood beside the door, eyes lingering on the words Hearthmart, printed on the front entrance glass. In the early days, he had believed those words defined the entire system, but now he understood something deeper. Words don't define a heart, and a system stays alive, not through strategy, but through people like Howard. On the way back to headquarters, he stopped at a small coffee shop. While waiting for his drink, he opened his laptop, not for Zoom, not for emails, but to rewrite the company's core values document. The first line he typed, "Kindness is a core competency." And below it, he added a note. "We don't measure a person by their reports, but by who remembers them when they're no longer around." When he returned to the office, there was no emergency meeting. But on the company bulletin board, a small note appeared. Each quarter, one person will be honored, not for hitting targets, but for helping others not give up. At locations across the country, people began asking one another, "Do we have someone like Howard here?" And from Idaho to Missouri, from Georgia to Oregon, quiet names started being remembered, not because they spoke the loudest, but because they lived the truest. And at store number 47, Howard still woke up at 5:30, still cleaned the floors, still checked the feedback board, still didn't know he was a symbol. But Chad knew, Jamie knew, Lacey knew. And for the first time in Hearthmart's history, a company once dismissed as cold and corporate was now quietly praised as warm as home. Miles never told anyone about that return visit, but when asked, "Mr. CEO, what strategy made the biggest difference in transforming the company?" he simply smiled and replied, "It was the moment I did nothing. I just stood outside the door and watched an employee help someone without being told." Because he knew a company does not live in PowerPoint. It lives in the hands of those who still carry a heart, even when no one asks them to. And if you've read this far, maybe you already know who the Howard in your life is. Don't forget them. They're the ones who keep everything going, even when no one is watching. And maybe what truly moves us about this story isn't that Miles is a CEO or that Howard is some unsung hero. It's because somewhere in your own life, there's someone like that too. Someone who never had a title, never stood on a stage, but showed up right when you thought no one would. If you've ever had someone like that, a Howard in your life, drop their name in the comments. If you believe kindness is a strength, not a slogan, share this video. And if you too believe that justice doesn't always need to shout, just the right person to quietly rise at the right time, then maybe you're ready for the stories that come next. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remind each other to live better, one video at a time.